So beginning with Parshas Bo, page 341 in the Chumash, 340, 341. Hashem is shifting from the first 7 plagues to the final 3. Final 3 get their own parsha. They even say a remez that the word Bo is Gematria Beis Aleph, which is 3. After Va'era, it starts with a Vav and an Aleph, as if to say, that's the 7, and here come the 3. So there's an interesting introduction, which the Parsha begins with. Hashem says to Moshe, Bo Paro, come to Paro, Ki ani echbadeti es libo, for I have hardened his heart. Hashem admits that it's really all his doing. Veslev avodav, in the heart of his servants, so that I may express my signs, I may show my signs in these people. Why? So we have something very important. So that the Pesach Seder should be exciting. That's basically what the next parsha says. The next pasuk says, so that you shall be able to describe to your children and grandchildren, there were frogs on his head, there were frogs in his bed, there were frogs in the house. This is the songs we sing. How boring would it be if it was just Moshe came, the Egyptians died, and we left. 5 minutes later, bring out the matzah. That wouldn't be exciting. So now we've got some real drama here. We have frogs and lice and animals and all this stuff. So that you should tell your children and your grandchildren, Eis asher hisalalti b'Mitzrayim, that which I made a mockery. Is a pretty good translation. I made a mockery of Egypt. V'esososai asher samti bam, and the signs which I showed, v'yidatem ki ani Hashem, and you will know that I am Hashem. Now, why did I translate that word as mockery? Because Rashi translates the word halalti as sichakti. I laugh at them.
That's kind of a disturbing image of Hashem.
Right. Well,
I mean, these are his creations.
Right. What I'm going to ask is, what does that even mean? But yeah, we're going to have the same issue. Especially the way you're phrasing the question becomes even more difficult, because we're told that when the Jews were crossing the sea, the angels wanted to say Shira, and Hashem wouldn't allow them to sing Shira. He says, my creations are drowning in the sea and you can't sing. Only the Jews who were being pursued by the Egyptians had a right to sing. So there is this, that's, so clearly the answer is going to be that this laughter isn't a ha kind of laughter, like, oh look, you slipped on a banana peel kind of laughter. So then, what is it? That's the question that we're asking.
It's a laughter that a young kid, like a toddler, challenging his father to a boxing match. And the father plays with him and laughs, right?
It's just hard to imagine, because people dying here. So it's hard to, you could say that it's like a joke that the Egyptians are trying to fight God. But God says it like, I'm making a mockery of them. Like he's using them as the butt of some joke. And that's what we're trying to understand. You could read it differently, but based on the way that they're reading it, which sounds like Hashem is mocking them or making a joke of them, how do we understand that?
Could it be that when it says I'm making a mockery of Egypt, that it doesn't mean it's making a mockery of the people, but of the gods that they were trusting in? Because Paro didn't believe that Hashem was Hashem, and it's a mockery of the ethos, so to say, of Egypt, not the people.
You could explain that. It's hard to read it into the verse, even though it uses the word b'Mitzrayim. Egypt, it's hard to read. It'll be harder to read it that way.
It says Mitzrayim, so.
Well, we assume it means the people. You could go there if you want to. The commentaries don't go there, but I don't see why I shouldn't be open to give that interpretation. Although, where is the mockery of the gods? We don't find God like we find by Eliyahu, that when they had this, what would you call a showdown on the top of Har Carmel, and it was their turn first, the prophets of the Baal, and they were trying to light a fire, trying to get a fire coming, and it wasn't coming, and Eliyahu says to them, maybe use louder voices, maybe your God is sleeping, the way that our sages read it, maybe your God has had to excuse himself for a few moments. That was the way that. So that's mockery, and we'll talk about that kind of mockery soon. But the simple reading here is that it's the people who are being mocked. So the Ramban, in his commentary, adds a couple of words here. The Ramban says, and I'm just going to translate the Ramban, Hashem is letting Moshe know that he is the one who hardened their heart, even though they expressed fear after the plague of hail. And they admitted that they were wrong, if you look at the end of last week's Parsha. And Hashem is now explaining to Moshe, or I should say justifying to Moshe, why he would harden the heart of Paro if Paro himself already conceded. So he says, I'm doing this in order to place in them, to put in them these signs, so that the Egyptians will know my strength. I will not punish them for this extra hardening of their heart. And furthermore, so that the Jews will know my greatness. So the Ramban gets into what we discussed last week, which was that Hashem is hardening his heart because Paro crossed some imaginary line. Then he goes on, V'tamis halalti, this concept of mockery, ki ani mitzachek bo, for I laugh at him. She'ani machbid as libo, for I harden his heart. V'oseh anekamas bo, and I take vengeance upon him. Hashem is mocking him, according to the Ramban, by playing Paro like a puppet. And that really makes our question very difficult. How? Right? That's the way the Ramban is learning. That Hashem is laughing as if, you would take a human being and tie him with strings and then make him do things that he doesn't want to do. You tie him with strings, you make him hit himself, and then you laugh and say, what a joke. Here is this person who's hitting himself. Ha ha ha. That's not funny. That's very dark comedy. Maybe there's some people who enjoy that. Most people don't. But that's the way the Ramban is reading it. Katam Yoshev Bashamayim Yischak. As it says, God sits in heaven and he laughs. So this Ramban is very difficult. And Rabbi Yerucham, in his commentary to the Parsha, sets out to tell us the true meaning of this Ramban. Because this does not mean that God in any way finds funny when people are doing things against their will. So Rabbi Yerucham starts off by revealing to us something very scary. He says, most of the time, things which we do are not really us doing anything. Let me phrase that a little better. Most of the time that we do things, it is not the full us that is making the decision to do that and acting out on the true us. And he explains, there are many factors that affect who you are. The way that you've been raised by people, the way that your society expects you to behave, the way society is training you to behave, the way that your inclinations lead you. All those are what drive your actions day to day, minute by minute. And there's very little of you, the pure you, that's acting at any time. This is an important theme that Rabbi Yerucham develops throughout much of his writings. He says, most of the time, there's very little of ourselves which is involved with anything.
So then what is the real you?
So what is the real you?
Unless you're saying it's your neshama, but then your neshama doesn't act.
Right, so then what is the real you? What is the pure you? I mean, let's take any time you have an action that somebody does. Let's say when you ate dinner today, who was eating? Was that you eating? Or was there some inclination within you that was pushing you to eat and to eat these foods, and were you consciously, where was your mind at that time? What were you doing? So if you were to remove and peel away all the parts of you that are external influences, whether external influences or internal external influences, what would be left? Who would be the real you? Could you even find the real you? Asks Rabbi Yerucham. He says, you don't believe me? Watch someone who's angry. Watch someone while they're really angry. And without question, anyone on the outside will tell you that that's not the person speaking. Nobody makes a fool of themselves in public like that. Nobody makes a spectacle. Nobody shouts strange things and their steam comes rising out of their head in public. If they would know, take a video of that guy and then play it back to him and see how he hides his face in shame. And if he doesn't, it's just because they're too arrogant to be embarrassed, which is another not them. So, but if you talk to that person while they're angry, they will say, of course I'm angry. I'm supposed to be angry. Do you know what that person did? And then they get angry and they justify that anger and explain themselves as if it really is them. So everyone knows it's them except them. Everyone knows it's not them except them. And he says, so we see it in the person who's angry. But the truth is that we know that person has no control over themselves. And Rabbi Yerucham wants to suggest that that's really all of us, all the time. So much of us is just external influence. It's a scary thought. It's a scary thought which I think requires a lot of contemplation, and he spends pages and pages discussing it. He has another whole essay on how you can find yourself. And basically the approach that he takes is finding your places of choice, finding those places where you actually make decisions, and not where you're running on automatic, but those places where you're conflicted, and those are the areas where you can find yourself in. Whatever, it's a long essay. But in general, most of the time, most of the things we do are on autopilot, based on information that's been, and even if we're making decisions, most of the time we're making decisions based on influences.
Maybe it's when you're angry that the real you is coming out. Because all the other times, you're influenced by society around you and by how you've grown up, and etc. So perhaps the anger, you said, oh, that's not the real you, but that's not the real you who's
right, but we said before,
external...
there's two types of externals. There's the external, which are the people around me, society, my parents, whatever. Mm-hmm. Then there's the internal external, which are my inclinations, my indulgences, the habits I've developed. Those are still internal, those are external internals. The real internal, the me, that's hard, that's anger. A person is never going to be created and born an angry person. If they are, they usually end up locked up somewhere.
No, it's not that they're created an angry person, but that the anger is, that's where the real...
Well, is it possible that there is such a person who's in their natural state is anger? Maybe, but that's a scary person. I don't know if I've ever met such a person.
I don't know what it means, the real you, if it's not the one influenced by external factors. Like how you raise your children, how they turn out. It's all very important in their development. And so what does it mean, like a person void of any kind of influence? It's maybe the child who was raised by wolves in the...
No, but that's also external influence. Well, I'm going to answer the question, the specific question you're asking is really the next point that he addresses. So what he wants to... Yes?
I wonder if we can potentially, idealistically, see a glimpse of the real person as in aspects when they're an infant, when they're still close enough to having come into this world.
The problem is they're not developed enough to show who they are.
That's it, but
right.
Maybe glimpses here and there, a temperament maybe, I don't
right.
know.
Well, you see, the thing is, I think that I'm a person, I believe about myself, that I would want to help another person if they asked me, could you help me carry this from a room to a room? I think that's the real me. but maybe that's only me, which I think what you're asking, maybe that's only me because I was taught in the Torah. So says Rabbi Rucham, you can find yourself at a time, he says, when the person is only focused on altruistic motives. He says if a person is only, in other words, has set aside all their personal interests, and that person is only thinking about deeper things. In other words, when a person is thinking, what am I doing in this world? At that point, when a person contemplates, what am I doing in this world? What am I here to do? And at that point, they say, you know what? I just want to do the right thing. He says that's closer to an actual person, to the soul of the person that just wants to do the right thing in the world. That's the natural state. And says the closer you are to there, the closer you are to the real you. And so most of the time, because we're pursuing other things and chasing after other things, we're further away from the real us.
I agree. I think that people learn to be kind and learn. I mean, maybe there's an inherent kindness, but people learn from their parents, you know.
Yeah, but why are they being kind? They're being kind because of some greater force, because of some greater meaning. So he's saying when you've stepped out of yourself and your focus is on something greater, the greater good, he says there you'll be closer to yourself. And again, I'm not. He has a whole separate essay and says you can only really find the true you when you delve into your personal challenges. That's his next essay. Here he's just raising the question. He says, but the you that's outside of all influences because you're just completely selfless. At the point of selflessness, that's where you can sort of find yourself.
But that in and of itself is something a person learns from example or from contemplation. It's all.
Yeah, but it's a negative feeling. It's not negative. It's a lack of.
I just don't. I'm with Charlie here. I don't think that to say that everything that we are and that we do is necessarily disconnected from who we really are.
No, you're right. No, absolutely. I should clarify that.
Everything is what makes us us.
Yeah.
It's all part of us. And so to say the real, what you seem to be describing is not the real you, but the original newborn.
No. I should clarify this. I'm not referring to, if someone would erase all your memories, what would you be like? We're referring to the you, and part of that is you. But part of that is you because that's the way that you're supposed to be, who you really are. And then there are things which are affecting you.
But and how we
positive or negative, not all of that is really you.
No, I mean, because even if you're not...
Well, let's take the angry
even
person.
Even if you're not always... people sometimes go through life kind of just not conscious of just not paying attention to what's going on. But if you're paying attention, you're making decisions all the time about how you're going to react to different things.
Well, he says the world of decisions is the world of you. That's what he says. That's where he goes.
Right.
But if you're not making decisions, which means you're just behaving, it's going to be impossible for you to figure out whether that was you or that was just some external influence that was acting on you. Unless you bring yourself, whatever that choice power within you, into each of your actions and you contemplate, is this the right thing or is it not the right thing? That's where you step in. Maybe I should have made that more clear.
You learn the right thing from those around you. You learn the right thing from the Torah, you learn the right thing from your parents, you learn the right thing. So making those decisions are all influenced by what you don't inherently know the right thing.
Well, let me use an example. I think that'll make this more clear. Let's say in the case of, let's use a simple case. Let's say someone wants to eat something that's not healthy for them. So if they're, right now, the them is faced with the challenge, should I eat it, should I not eat it? Someone who simply eats it and says, I don't care, that person didn't actually process and go through, well, you should realize that this is an external influence. This is not really you. You want to be healthy. When you process that way and you have that internal monologue or even a dialogue for some people, so when you have that discussion within yourself, then you can find that you. But if you don't, which is the way most of us behave all the time, and you just do it, even if you have that, it's not healthy, well, I'll eat it anyway, but you didn't go deep enough to find the you and to contemplate, well, 1 second, what's making me go this way and what's making me go that way, where I separate the parts of me which are really me and I recognize what are just indulgences and influences, then that's not the real me acting.
I also think one other thing that's been left out of here is part of who you are is what you're receptive to from those influences. Like, not everyone will pick up certain bad behaviors. Like, you can have a group of friends who, all do the wrong thing, whether they're gang stealing or whether they're smoking something they shouldn't be smoking. You're not receptive to it. Like, you say, no, that's not for me, I'm not doing that. Right. So, that is a decision, but in other words, you're not taking up that influence. And so that's really who you are.
Well, let me use that example and clarify the way Rabbi Yerucham would understand. Rabbi Yerucham would say, listen, if you say to yourself, if you just, I can't do that, I can't handle that, I'm not interested in that kind of thing, that's not you. But if you say to yourself, what would I want? What's when you delve into what your processes are, when you think about yourself and you say, what do I want to be? Does this fit with who I am? When you ask yourself deep questions like that, and you say, why is that wrong? When you contemplate things on a more in-depth level, where you're actually considering and thinking about things without making just decisions based on some outside part of you, then that's the real you. That's the way he would say it. So if someone is simply not influenced because they don't care, then that's still not the real them. But if they say, I want to be this kind of person, and therefore I'm not going to allow them to influence me, because then that person is being more self-aware.
I once heard from, I don't know whether this was a psychologist or not, I don't remember who, but if you could program all of your past experiences into a program like a computer program, you could figure out what a person's decisions would be.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah, but that's pretty bad. That doesn't fit with.
Does that leave
No, I
free
don't think
will?
that's true.
Well, that's the issue of free will in terms of a person's nature.
You have the free will to make the decision, but all those influences that you've had directs your free will.
Well, so that's where Rabbi Yerucham would disagree, and he would say that those are all the outsides, and then your ability to choose the real you, that's the you that can decide even counter to your external influences. In other words, counter to this claim about the computer. So says Rabbi Yerucham, that's what's going on here. Is what Rashi and the Ramban are referring to are the fact that Hashem has put external influences on Paro to make him decide one way or the other until he stops to realize that it's not him making the decision. In other words, Paro refuses to accept that Hashem is hardening his heart, because it could be that Yerucham doesn't say these words, that Hashem only hardens Paro's heart as far as if Paro would stop for 1 second and say, what am I doing here? What is happening? At that point, Hashem would no longer harden his heart. So while we might allow, certain external influences, such as if it's too cold outside, I'm not going to go, I'll go hungry rather than go get food. So that's a decision which we make. But if we would stop and say, 1 second, I need to eat. So then you can make a rational decision. You could say, well, it's too cold, I'll be uncomfortable. The discomfort of the cold is more bothersome to me than the discomfort of the hunger. Then that's you making a decision. But if it's too cold and therefore you're too lazy, so even though it might be the same decision, it's not you making the decision. He says, Hashem removes from Paro, adds to him only these external influences, but if Paro would take it further and actually contemplate and say, it's not me making these decisions, then at that point he would have broken the spell.
Sort of sounds like that's what's going on in verse 7. His servants say, step back, look what's going on. Stop, think. Don't just react.
So, exactly. The people are trying to do that to him. But it doesn't work. You have to figure out why it doesn't work. So, he takes this a step further, and he brings a fascinating parable told by Reb Chaim of Volozhin. Reb Chaim of Volozhin says the Talmud discusses this city called Luz. In Luz, the city of Luz, nobody ever died. When people got old or they were done with life, they said goodbye to their families and they left the city. And when they left their city, they passed away. Now, why would they do that? Good question. Are they halachically allowed to do it? Leave the city, another good question. Does the city actually exist? An even better question. But the point is, the Talmud discusses this city of where people never die. So says Reb Chaim Volozhin, could you imagine if someone from the city of Luz comes to visit the outside world? Let's assume he's not too old where he's not going to die just by leaving. He comes to visit the outside world. And he says, how come you have so few people here? Like, where is your great-great-great-great-grandfather? He said, well, he died. So after about 2 or 3 hours, that'll take you to explain what death actually means to someone who knows nothing about it. He'll say, you guys only live for 75 to 100 years? So you probably eat very healthy. I mean, you want to keep, as much. Say, well, actually, no, we're actually big into food. You should see the fast food industry in the United States of America. He doesn't understand. It doesn't make sense. But so he says, well, okay, I get that you do that, but you probably live in very simple houses. He says, no, come, let me drive you around the neighborhood. And there you have people who build little palaces for themselves for the 70-something years that they're in the world.
Why would he think that you live in simple houses?
Because what's the point of exerting that much effort or spending all your money on big houses if it's just for 70 years? Yeah, we don't have that question because we think 75 years is a long time. Or, 120. Let's go stick with 120. What's America up to now? Average 75? Something like that?
Or I think for men it's 77 and women it's even older.
Oh, okay. Let's stick with 120. To him, 120 is so little, it would be like someone say, well, in this country they only live to 20, they only live to 10 or 12 years old. They built palaces for 10 years. Like, what's the point? So he says, well, you probably don't spend too much money on clothing because how long is that going to last? He said, no, not into clothing. You should see the fashion industry. So who's the crazy one? The guy from Luz or the guy answering him?
Neither.
Well, which one is...
Of course, we're going to side with the one that the crazy one's from Luz because we are living the life that has an end.
Yeah, to us it makes sense. What do you mean? Of course what do you mean? You don't have to eat healthy. You indulge a little or a lot. Right?
Life is too short, enjoy.
Yes.
We have that.
We actually have that, right? For eat, drink, and be merry.
No one here, I think, is crazy. People are just coming from very different perspectives, very different experiences, and so they're going to be looking at it from a
absolutely.
point.
But Reb Chaim Volozhin's point, this is what Reb Rucham is borrowing from him. He says, what that shows me is that most of the time we're not acting based on what we consider to be the most rational decisions. If I was to say to someone, I'm about to put a human being into this world, what should his daily regimen, I'm just using food as an example, this applies to every other thing, but what should his daily regimen for food be? We would stick a person who we are, now I'm sending a guy to Mars, and this person is supposed to be the one to populate Mars. And what foods am I going to send? So are you going to send Snickers bars or are you going to send Nutri-Grain bars? Which one are you sending?
Everything in moderation. Gotta have some of everything.
Absolutely. So do we live in a country where people live with moderation? We don't. We live in a world of indulgence.
I can't
So
imagine this guy going to Mars and never, ever having another Snickers bar.
there you go. Well, maybe he keeps Chol Yisrael.
Have a Mars bar.
So, Rabbi Yerucham finishes this point.
I prefer the three Muslims.
He finishes this point. If Alexander Dumas knew what they did with his title. So he says the joke, the game that's being played with Paro, is not the joke. It's not the joke that Hashem is playing with him. He says Paro's playing the joke on himself. And the laughter, the mockery, is he's mocking himself. Why? Because he doesn't stop for 1 second to take life seriously. Mockery, the words of Rabbi Yerucham, powerful words. He says, leitzanus, what we refer to as scoffing or mockery, who lo lasim lev le'inyanim, is not to take life or anything seriously. Lo l'romem u'lagada le'inyanim, not to consider anything in a serious way. If Paro would stop for 1 second and say, what am I doing here? What am I crazy? At that moment, the joke would be over, the game would be over. But he's so lost in his imaginary world that he's made a big mockery of himself. That's what it means. It means, ani metzachik bo, I laugh at him. Not I laugh at him like ha ha ha. Hashem is saying, I have no choice but to leave him in his state of self-defamation because he refuses to stop and think for 1 second.
So are you saying that if Paro had agreed to let the Jewish people go before the rest of the plagues came about, and he did that after serious contemplation as opposed to just saying it because he was scared of the plague,
Right.
but he did it because he came to the conclusion that that's really the right thing to do, that we wouldn't have had the rest of the plagues?
That's what he seems to be saying. That's what he seems to be saying. And that's why it's a big joke. It's a big joke because the only person who is dragging him through the mud here is his own imagination, his own inclinations. He is making a laughing stock of himself and no one can stop him.
So this goes along with the interpretation then that we talked about last week, that Hashem didn't take his free choice away, but was strengthening him to allow him to exercise.
Right. Well, he's taking it further. And he's saying Hashem isn't even strengthening him. Hashem just put more outside influences, which if the him would have woken up for just a minute, would have not affected him. He says what this tells us is that the real joke, we talk about a leitz. A leitz is a clown, but we talk about leitzanus, which is mockery. And we say that mockery is one of the most dangerous forces in the world. Mockery is not to make fun of someone else. That's a symptom of leitzanus, of mockery. Real mockery is to refuse to consider something seriously. As a symptom, if you refuse to consider things seriously, then you can make jokes. You know, there are people who make jokes, real dark jokes, about things that no one should be making jokes about. You could do a search on jokes about execution, jokes about child abuse. You could find jokes about the Holocaust. Jokes, real serious jokes, that people will tell them around the dinner table and laugh. How is it possible that someone can make a joke like that? Because they will refuse to consider the seriousness of something. And you can sit there suffering 10 plagues and without one moment stopping to consider the seriousness of it, and it's a joke. The whole thing is a joke. You can laugh. It almost sounds like Paro is a psychopath. Those people who the more you punish them, the more they laugh. because that laughter is a way that they can ignore even their own pain and their own suffering. So Hashem says, you want to live like that? How about we swing you all the way? Where he actually says, Hashem Hatzadik. Hashem is righteous. Vani va'ami harishaim, and I and my people are wicked. Who made him say that? Hashem put so much inspiration into him that he made him say that. And Paro says, yeah, that's exactly what I think. I think I'm wrong and Hashem is right. Just a few psukim later, and he's driving Moshe out of his palace. Say, don't you ever come back here. Yigarish osam mi'eis pnei Paro. He drives them from before his face. And he doesn't stop to think for 1 second that, what am I doing? How could I have been 10 minutes ago so for sending the Jews out? Because he just won't stop and think. The Gemara tells us that this world was created with the letter Hey. The letter Hey is, of course, shaped with a bar on top, a bar on the side, and a half bar on the left side. So this world is created with the letter Hey. Why? Because, metaphorically speaking, if someone chooses to fall out, they can fall out the bottom of the world. Again, it's a metaphor. There's no one's falling into the, no one's falling off the earth. Even the people in Australia who probably have magnetic shoes to walk upside down, they don't fall off the earth. So, asks the Gemara. Okay, so I get why there's a hole at the bottom of the hay so that people can fall out, but why is there an opening at the top? Because it's only a half bar on the left. Right? So the Gemara answers because a person can always come back in. You could do teshuvah. Teshuvah is always tashuv hay. You return into the hay. The person could do teshuvah and return. Asks the Gemara, well, why can't you come back the same path you fell out of? Walk back in. Says the Gemara, you can never come back in the same way you left. Right? You've all heard this before? Why can't I come back the same way I left? The Gemara never bothers to explain that. Says Rabbi Rucham, says, what does that mean you fall off the earth? What does that mean you fell out of the world? If you want to sin, you fall out the bottom. What sin are you doing that you're falling out of the earth? Rabbi Rucham said there's only one thing you can do to fall out of the world. And that's to refuse to take life seriously. Where the world means nothing to you. Where there's no purpose. There's nothing important to you. There's no goals. You make your own life meaningless. Where you're just following the automatic responses, stimulus response, which is the way most of us live our lives. Most humans live our lives. I think we are blessed with some direction that allows us to step out of that more often. But most of the people in the world just stimuli, response. And so those people, if that's all you are, what are you doing in the world? If you have no purpose in the world, you're outside the hay. So you can't come back the same path you went in because you fell out by lack of taking things seriously. You can't take things seriously simply by undoing lack of taking. You have to take a whole new path. You have to contemplate a whole new meaning to life. That's why he says you can't go back the same way that you came out. The story of Egypt, then, according to this, is the story of trying to get us, and maybe this is something that we should insert into our Pesach Seder as well, to say, well, what did Hashem take us out for? What are we doing in this world? Why was I created? Why was I born? That's the real question. What is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is the real question that Hashem is presenting to the Jewish people and to Paro. And the Jews watch while Paro is so lost in his egomania that he destroys his country, destroys his kingdom, destroys for what? because of his arrogance, because of his... what are the other attributes that you're looking at? But clearly it's not him, because he's not acting rationally. And Hashem is controlling him. As if to say, Hashem says, well, I'll even help you find the you. I'm going to shake you about and change your will so much that let's see if you can then find yourself. And even with all the influences, he still doesn't find himself.
But wouldn't the real you in him be how he acted with the first few plagues, where he didn't need to have his heart hardened? He did it himself. He did it for himself.
Right.
So doesn't that show who the real he is? What
Yeah.
are his external influences?
No, because those were his egomania, his arrogance, his pride, whatever other words.
Maybe that's what
It's
he
the real
really
him.
is. Yeah, maybe that's who he is.
But maybe, but we're suggesting that had he thought more rationally, you want to suggest that the real him is irrational? It makes no sense. It makes no sense that a person who would want to.
Someone who has such pride, who just all he cares about is his own.
So this gets back into the debate we had before. Rabbi Yerucham's understanding that a person is never going to be like that. That's going to be considered an external influence. Self-preservation would be much more of a place that a person would go to with rational thought than for a person to say, I will die rather than to be insulted.
So it seems to me that everybody has the same you. I mean, the same who am I. Everybody has the same one.
Well, I think there would be some difference. There would be some important differences. But the concepts of just the basic givens, I think we would all share. At least the way he's understanding it. Yes?
So perhaps when his firstborn son passes, that really hit the core of the real him, the humanness in him,
Maybe.
possibly.
No, he went and chased after the Jews.
That's days later. Days later he had a new.
That's
Still,
fine.
But he does make the right decision, and that's his own decision. It could be that was the only thing that actually hit him.
Hit the real.
Maybe. I think that's-
Opened
I
up for temporary.
I definitely see that. I think that's a fair suggestion. But the key here is, this is the point we're making, is that the story of Egypt is the story of trying to get us, especially if we talked about this earlier in the week, they were in a slave mentality. The slave is probably the person who never stops to contemplate the meaning of life. Because there is no life. They're turned almost into machines. And they need to learn this lesson and watch how this person, they don't understand. They don't understand why Paro is behaving this way. His people even say to him, like he was suggesting, "Haterem teidak yavdim Mitzrayim." Don't you know that the whole country it's a mess right now, and it's all because of what? Because we're holding on to these people that we're going to end up letting go anyway. There's an amazing teaching from the Pachad Yitzchak in his. He's actually he discusses this in his essays on Purim, but he says, there's a famous Gemara that says, "Kol letzenusa asira, chutz mi letzenusa d'avodah zara." All litzanus, mockery, is prohibited. You're allowed to make jokes. Jokes are funny and jokes are healthy, and laughter is the best medicine. That's what they say. Although antibiotics has done some greater things than laughter, as far as I can tell. But laughter is good. But mockery is never good. To take something serious and to downplay it is never a good thing, except for, let's say, Nusa d'avodah zara, you're allowed to mock idol worship. Says the Pachad Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner, he says, why would that be okay? If you're not supposed to mock things, you shouldn't be able to mock anything. And if you are supposed to mock things which are bad, I should be able to mock anything that's bad. Why can't I mock non-kosher food? Why can't I mock people who are thieves? Why can't I mock other kinds of negative things? So he explains something very interesting. There's a Rabbeinu Yonah in Shari Tshuva who says, on the verse in Mishlei, Matzerei fla kesef, if you want to find the pure silver, if you want to see how much silver there is in something, you got to put it into a refinery. V'kur lazav. Same thing with gold. You have to put it into a furnace in order to get out the pure gold. How do you get the pure person? How do I see, he's not talking about the same kind of pure person, the self, that we discussed earlier. He's asking, how do I know who the real person is? So the verse in Mishlei says, V'ish lefi mahalalo. A person is what he praises. You are what and whom you speak positively about. A verse in Mishlei. What do you compliment? What do you hold in high regard? Says Rabbi Yonah that he continues on basically and says, someone who's mishabeach as hatov v'hatovim, someone who praises good things and good people, that's a good person. Someone who praises bad things and bad people is a bad person. Now, this might be a little bit different than we might think. Why can't I have a good person who talks positively about bad people? Well, yeah, but what does he talk more positively about? A person is defined by what they consider in high regard, which means, he says like this, Rav Hutner says, that if I would have a person who studied all the Torah in the world, but doesn't praise the Torah and hold it in high regard, and then you've got another person who knows very little Torah, but holds that Torah in high regard, the second person is considered better off and a better person than the first person. If you have someone who has done many good deeds but doesn't hold them in high regard, and someone who's done very few good deeds but holds good deeds in high regard, that's a better person. Which means, he says, that the real definition of a person is what you value, what you hold important. And what you don't hold important, what you give no consideration to, that is the opposite of you. So he says, the ultimate joke, the greatest wicked person, is the person who holds the thing with the lowest esteem in the highest esteem. If you take a piece of wood and you consider it to be a god, if you take a piece of wood and you consider it your friend, that's not so bad. Right? People have pet rocks. If this rock is your friend, that's fine, because you're only lifting up this inanimate object and making it on the level of you. And you know what? I've met such people. But if you take an inanimate object and you make it God, idol worship, that is the greatest mockery in the world. It is the greatest example of you completely disregarding anything real. It's the ultimate joke. And therefore, you can mock idol worship. You need to mock idol worship, because mocking idol worship is you recognizing that any suggestion of godliness on an inanimate object is itself a joke. It's not that you're mocking them. Just like God isn't laughing at Pharaoh. Pharaoh's making a joke of himself. He's laughing at himself. Nobody's laughing at him. He's dragging himself, and he's acting on the stage, and he's the people in the audience laughing at him, and he's the people in the audience throwing the tomatoes at him, because he is the one who is making a mockery of himself. Hashem allows him to do so. Hashem gives Paro the opportunity to make that joke of himself. Hashem allows him and gives him the props to make the joke of himself. That's what it means, Asher Salalti b'Mitzrayim. Hashem doesn't laugh at him, and Hashem doesn't put him in that state. He puts himself in that state. Hashem just says, really? You want to behave like that? Well, how about I give you another opportunity to make a fool of yourself? And Paro looks at it and he dives in.
But Paro isn't actually laughing at himself. He's taking himself seriously.
Yeah.
And it seems more like Paro is trying to make a mockery of God, because he keeps saying, take the plague away, and then I'll let you go, and then they take the plague away, and then he keeps going back on his word.
Yeah, but that's
Paro's
still.
actually making a mockery, attempting to make a mockery of Moshe, of Aaron, and of Hashem.
I think that we can even add that into the words of what Rabbi Rucham is saying, that's exactly it, because you've got the mime who's pretending that he's in a glass case. And then he takes the hammer and tries to smash the glass case. And then the hammer rebounds off the fake glass and hits him in the head. And you go, how did it rebound? There's no glass there. Because the whole thing is him pretending that he's making a mockery of something else. That itself, where Paro thinks that he's going to somehow play games with Hashem, and really he's playing games with himself, is Paro laughing at himself and mocking himself. Because all he has to do is stop for 1 second and say, who am I doing this to?
He's in effect making a mockery of himself, but he would not be laughing.
But he
at
is,
himself.
because he is the one who is experiencing and recognizing the joke more than anyone else. He just refuses to see it. Because he's the only one who doesn't see the seriousness here.
You see the jokes. Because after each plague, I said, I fooled them.
No, but that's the joke. He thinks that that's the joke, but that's not the joke. The joke is that he thinks he fooled someone. So the joke is on him. But who's laughing? So he's going to play another joke on himself to make the joke even better. And just to finish off, I mean, this is deep stuff, I understand, and this is something, but the point here that we have to recognize, and again, besides, this is an amazing pshat, because it changes the whole world is a stage, and we are all actors on that stage. Here, Paro is the actor, he's running the whole thing by itself, right? He's Hamlet and Macbeth.
So what about Rashi's comment? It's like, are you saying Rashi's comment should...
So all these explanations that talk about I'm laughing is more that Hashem is putting him in this state. There's no actual laughing. Whenever we say it's as if we're in terms of the way we would see it, as if it's laughing. But Hashem is just providing him again with more toys and props for him to make a joke of himself. For us, I think Rabbi Rucham is really speaking to us. He doesn't care about Paro. Paro is long dead. But for us, we have to more seriously consider who we are, what part of us is the us. I know we were having a debate over this earlier, and whatever explanation you want to take, but these types of thoughts should affect us in a way where maybe we stop behaving like Paro sometimes, and we stop just assuming that the things we believe, the things we're experiencing, are really our own decisions, that we weren't affected by outside influences, that we weren't affected by our indulgences and our lazinesses, and that we weren't affected by someone who spoke to us in a way which was very convincing, and we weren't affected by society at large. It's very hard for us to sort through. It's a lifetime challenge to try to sort through. But if we begin, maybe at some point we can all wake up from this big joke and maybe get off the stage and start living life the way that we're supposed to live. At least let's leave the joke on Paro. And for us, we need to be a little more serious. Thank you.